Okay, good morning. It's always a good idea to know what you want to say before you start the cameras rolling, but my experience has been that it's better to be completely spontaneous, so much so that it's actually better not to know what you're about to say. This is really about 0 point energy, this thing that's been going on for so long, this conversation that's been going on for so long. This conversation which strangely seems to provoke the sort of reaction which we would normally expect from religious fundamentalists. And this gets exactly to my point that I would allege that much of modern science is actually as disconnected and out of touch as in our history, when famously the Wright brothers were flying all over Kitty Hawk before the mainstream media even of the day even acknowledged it. Now, of course, we've got the internet, and every quirky conspiracy theory is out there in abundance, which of course muddies the waters. And of course, we've got trillions of dollars being spent on misinformation and on controlling media and war and you name it. So yeah, there are lots of forces unleashed, but it's not in service of the light but of the darkness. So it does create a bit of a challenge, but nevertheless what is awesome is that the dimensions are leaking through, which you'd expect them to do. I mean, there's a limited extent to which it's possible because we are so fickle, but basically the only reason that we're getting visited is because we're messing this up, and it's affecting the universe, because the universe is a global consciousness. And so I'm very fascinated with this exercise called the global energy movement, which is bringing together a number of, simply bringing together the facts in terms of science and physics and what's actually been happening. There are several different ways in which energy can be tapped, and this is why I try to refer to this tap, because basically the need to debunk the possibility using the laws of entropy, etc., is what we're witnessing here is more than that. Yeah, of course, there's nonsense out there, but the point is, if we're going to be able to say that no, this is not possible, and there is no such thing as a free lunch, is the favorite expression we use, trotted out to try and it's almost like a personal attack on the point of view than it is a legitimate science-based accusation. It's you know, that's what I'm saying. It's propaganda. It's not science to say that there's no free lunch, because it implies that something is free, and in actual fact, what really is the case is that there's nothing free. The law of conservation of energy is perfectly valid, but it exists only within a defined dimension, which of course is inaccurate. We know there are degrees of complexity to all that. I mean, we run into bumps. I mean, look at the last 30 years of. No, sorry, not the last 30. The last since 1930. It'll be 70 plus 18. It'll be 88 years, virtually. I think the age of John Searle. Look at all the proliferation of particles since Einstein. and the complexification of, I say complexification because Occam's razor tells us that the simplest answer is normally the best one. And yet by disposing of Maxwell's ether, we've ignored entirely the fact that there's far more that has been predictable using the physics. And these are obviously repeatable forces. Maxwell's equations and Maxwell's math of electrical and magnetic forces are pretty sound, predictably behaving. It's a predictable area of science. We use it all the time. So it's absurd to want to have another theory of the universe that flies in its face, and without actually bringing anything new to the understanding. So the point is that if we are going to dispose of, you have to put inverted commas around the 0-point energy, because it's actually the lie in it is it makes the assumption that everything about energy is known, and this is the furthest from the truth. There are enormous gaping holes and contradictions which are just fudged over with constants, as if that's cool, and all the while creating more complex obfuscation, really, of what's really a very simple universe at certain levels where we can predict it. And so basically what's emerged is there are several different ways of getting energy. No doubt this goes back thousands of years. We haven't just progressed linearly from dumb to stupid to brilliant. In fact, in the process of this brilliance, there's been a control which has concealed stuff that's pretty useful. It's obscene to talk about patenting. There's some things which God created. Nobody can patent any more than you can own the earth or the universe. It's something which we find ourselves in, and we can certainly find many different ways of getting energy very clean. Some of it's pretty awesome. So yeah, the people who shout loudest about conspiracy theorists, which was, by the way, a term that was promoted, and the use of it was promoted by forces that aren't our friends, are those who actually are conspiring. And that should be no surprise. It's pretty logical that you would get the conspiracy theorists most demonized in the eyes of the conspirators. So does one identify them? Yes, I'm not going to go into it in great detail. It's not important. You can find out for yourself. And it's the trouble. The reason I don't want to go into it is there's no. I don't like this us and them thing. It's us and us, because even in these organizations that have become a part of this type of conspiracy, sometimes unwittingly, they're family men. People who are earning a salary, trying to feed their families and do the best they can. And I always say, there, but for the grace of God, go you or I. I mean, we do what we do, in life. But the important thing is that there are many ways in which you can tap energy from the universe. And I have to use the word universe because it's the only word that embraces everything, all of science and all of it. So yes, just in the same way as the water that occurs naturally in the earth, on a healthy earth, is there for us to sustain ourselves. So there are other natural laws which make the design of technology to harvest the blessings we need, and in abundance. And of course, as long as we allow that to be the preserve of corporates, we run into problems. And you saw what happens in India, if you look into it, where a nuclear power station manager sort of did his scholarly work and advanced clean energy. And of course that was shut down. But I think we need to get together. We need to lend support to all these people around the world who are working for a clean, healthy environment for our children. And we need to eventually chase these enemies of the earth who are promoting harmful energy and technology. We need to chase them out into the light of day, and if they must go down to their dungeons to get away from the glare of the light, well, then so be it. But it's not my battle. My battle is actually to do what we can, and this is why I'm making this video, is to basically co-opt everyone out there who, like myself, feels the same way, that we've got an abundant world and we need to find ways in our daily actions to promote that and advance that. And I think what's going to happen is this is going to come out into the open. Of course, what has happened in the past is anyone who brings out free energy is automatically targeted, because that threatens the entire edifice of our servitude. And don't pretend it isn't there. The most blatant instrument of servitude is fiat money. I mean, this is a criminal banking scam. This is a Ponzi scheme. We saw it happen in Zimbabwe, and we're going to close our eyes because it's happening with the world currency. I mean, this is silly. Does that mean that America has to fall and the dollar has to fall? Of course not. They're as much victims of this as everybody else is. It might have happened on their watch, in a sense that it's happened to what is supposed to have been the paragon of democratic people's government by the people for the people, and that's a shame, but it happens. Shit happens. And if there's anything exceptional about Americans, I think it's your time now to stand up and do the exceptional thing. And let's stop wars. Let's apply all our abundant technology to nurturing and finding natural ways, because you can't manage this without using this. Coercion never works. It always it leads to the worst results. I mean, the Creator will do as He's done before and cull and nurture, if that's the appropriate thing to do. But our challenge is to find a better way of doing things, a way of alleviating the suffering of the poor, all of which is part of the legacy we inherit. So let's find more efficient ways of using natural symbiosis with the earth, because that's the force that you even claim in your teachings of science is what brought us here. So let's use those forces in a nurturing way. And it's one of the things that happens with free energy, by the way, is you can find ways of making sure that inefficiencies are fed back into the positive stream. So you can allow for gain just by exploiting the natural enchanted dust, which is really what we are. We're enchanted dust from all accounts. And why should we be surprised that are we so arrogant that we don't predict that there are situations where kinks in our physics are not exploited? That doesn't mean that you've got more energy out than is coming in. It means that you're humble enough to accept that when you place your entire scientific edifice upon ignorance, which is what you're doing when you turn a blind eye to the possibilities of the nature of the universe, while at the same time advancing science based on a misunderstanding of gravitation, or complete ignorance of gravitation, just because someone created a formula which approximates some of the time, its behavior. I mean, to me, what is most glaring, and I don't know whether it's actually a conspiracy or just coincidental, but once you've succeeded in excluding from the definition of gravitation a force which is of the order of magnitude of 1 times 10 to the 30, Lord alone knows what, somewhere up there, it's massively. The massive disparity between what we call gravitational forces and electrical forces, then, I mean, this is sheer arrogance. Why would we expect gravitation to be anything other than an electrical force in the absence of any knowledge of a force that's even comparable to it? Surely Occam's razor tells us that it's to be assumed that gravity is an electrical force. And in the process of making that perfectly legitimate assumption based on perfectly legitimate established science, you know, I mean, it's absurd. It's the height of arrogance. So, yeah, we can assume that gravitation is a weak electrical force until someone shows us otherwise. And then let's at least apply our minds to understanding its mechanism, as Tesla was doing, and as others were doing, and even some rather eccentric thinking minds have done and proven in many respects. So yeah, there are good people who are doing a lot to advance our understanding of various ways in which we can tap clean energy. And it's obscene that we're sitting with an internal combustion engine. You've got this radiator to try and cool the thing down. Obviously, you're wasting a lot of energy. How is this even possible? Why have we even gone this way? I mean, it's creating pollution. It's harsh. It's noisy. I mean, this is shocking. I think we need a global energy movement, and there is such an energy movement. You can find them on YouTube. They're producing useful, documented, first-hand testimony of people who have been methodically and in sometimes very humble working people who have gone out and tried to replicate certain types of free energy devices which have looked interesting and sometimes just phenomenal. Look at Searle Magnetics in Northern California, who are just basically doing research, just quite happy to say, okay, fine. The means to make these things is not always available on the scale, especially where people are able to manipulate the prices of raw materials like neodymium, which is as abundant as copper and not in as much demand as copper. So the logical market force must dictate to bring it down, and the only place it's down is in China. Okay, they do have lots of it, but I still think that $70 for a kilogram of the pure neodymium is like obscenely expensive. And it can be copper. So copper is 70 kilograms. But you know, I think this is reactionary, these prices, because quite obviously, if you take an electronic device, you take a gyroscopic platform, which is what you're really doing with the Searle effect. You're actually harvesting with these little wheels, composite wheels. You're harvesting only enough to keep it flying, and it uses nothing because it flies on a magnetic bearing, so it doesn't need very much. You just got to find the right sweet spot where you can allow this perfect resonance. So you're talking about a resonance of matter, which happens to be able to take the natural behavior of electrons. To me, I think for others' minds out there thinking about how to understand this and how to model this device, which clearly has been produced, and many of the elements have been tested. I think you need to look at this as a mini solar system or a mini planetary system of moons. There are natural, scalable forces, it would appear, that are electrical in nature and static and magnetic in nature. Or, we witness these in terms of our earthly science. We're able to use some of these laws, and there are predictably more which have not been really clear. Now, if you remember, of course, if you conceal the real nature of gravity, which in fact nobody's concealing it because they don't have a theory of gravity. Einstein put some formula together, and so did Newton, but they don't have any science to explain gravity. And by denying it, by pretending it's not electrical, which I think you must be assuming people are pretending it's not electrical, because the science is there. It means you've concealed the nature of gravity, and therefore, if you conceal the nature of gravity, of course, it's very easy to conceal also that, like electromagnetic and electrical forces, gravitational forces are possible in both repulsive and attractive forms. And I think if you look at creating a gyroscopic platform, you've basically created a vector platform onto which you can construct this inverse field. So obviously, if you're going to be talking about anti-gravity, it must by definition occur on a platform. Now, that is what the Searle effect generator did, in my opinion, from looking at everything that I've seen. It's because remember, I'm assuming that you have some knowledge of the basics of it. It's easy to understand. So obviously you've got these rotating discs. There are 12 of them on a single stage Searle effect device, and maybe more, maybe less. I don't know. I'm not particularly familiar with that, but the principle is pretty sound in the sense that what you've got is the planetoids are applying force to your stator. So you've created you've taken a gyroscoping set of rings, and I was looking at the balance of percentage weight between the ring and the stator. I think is also important from an inertial point of view. But in essence, what you've done is you've linked the two together. So you've linked that gyroscopic set of wheels, which is being held to it's being held to the stator ring, the sun ring, and the planetoids are also being impinged. They're both impinging on one another. So the relative masses of these two is a factor in the design of this particular machine. But what you've got is in the center, you've got the stator is actually both electronic and it's physical. And it does this by having a composite of your four elements, which, of course, if you've looked at it, it's the neodymium as a getter of these alleged random electrons. And then you've got your Teflon minus, which is just providing a wall, a dam for controlling the flow. And then basically the magnetic ring is your front with the copper, which provides a magnetic bearing, and it also provides a passage to the copper, which is your ultimate conductive layer that allows the levitating planetoids. So it's not quite the same as the solar system in terms of the electrical. You short circuiting. The copper is sort of is short circuiting the spaces, the distances between the planets and the sun in this particular model. So it's an adaptation, but it's certainly based on the same physics. I'm still sort of learning about the behavior of comets and planets, but it would appear that planets will spontaneously take up an orbit defined by their charge. So we could, and that's why planets will change in orbit, because the electrical universe results in these features that we call impact craters. Most of them are, in this model, actually discharged points, which could be both directions. In other words, a negatively charged device or a negatively charged body that enters the solar system from elsewhere could bring in a massive change of charge to a planet if it passed within it to not just gravitationally but by electrical discharge change the charge of the planet and result in a change in its orbit. But it's actually a lot more gentle than the gravitational model would hold. And I think we should expect to find a far more gentle interaction than the prophets of doom would have us believe, because I think that if there's an issue of probability, obviously, which affects when, and obviously massive trauma is possible in the solar system, but the fact that we're here today with the degree of entropy that we have here suggests that this is a pretty cool universe, and so we shouldn't be so easily intimidated and bullied into a state of paranoia and terror about impending doom. Of course, we could get wiped out in the twinkling of an eye. I have no doubt there are forces out there in the universe which could obliterate us in no time, but the balance of probability is not. In other words, we wouldn't be. What actually is happening is we're busy systematically destroying the Earth long before that's going to happen. And I think there's a wake-up call for us to, as a species, emerge as a coherent type 1 civilization, which is pretty obvious. I mean, obviously, civilizations either get their act together or they wipe themselves out. And my bet is we get our act together. It mightn't seem like that. It's only because we've allowed the poisoning of the village well in our mainstream media of public knowledge and understanding because of the darkness and the greed. So that's going to be there. We shouldn't get excited about it or be surprised about it or be afraid of what Gandhi said, the only devils are the ones running around in our own minds and in our hearts as well. I think like Mandela said, people have to be taught to hate and they can be taught to love. So we should all make sure that that's our objective, because it's got nothing to do with race. It's to do with power. And even those of us who have traveled this road in this country must be aware that with agendas spanning generations, those who love power more than people are inevitably to be found manipulating all of us, not just the advantaged, but the disadvantaged, but the advantaged as well, who are, after all, if there's to be people who are disadvantaged and poor, there have to be those of us who have made it possible, and that's the ownership that we should all make, not just white people, but people in power around the world. And we see this happening in India, we see this happening around the world, where there are good people, and they're amongst all of us. And when they get together and just think, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore, then I think we can rejoice. We can say, yeah, we're going to get it together. So, yeah, good wishes to all of you guys out there who are doing this awesome work. I'm just talking about it. But I know you're there and I know what you're doing. And we all love you and we all pray for you and thank God that you are out there, that we're not alone. Not only in the earth, but we're not alone with this dilemma. And there are people who are behind the scenes working. I could start naming names, and maybe sometime it'll be the right place to do so, but I'm not going to bother now. It doesn't really matter. So what's important is for you to know that there's a good prognosis for mankind to make it there. And I think that 30 minutes is enough of my waffling. If you can bear your way through this and share some of the passions I've shared, then do so. Thanks so much.